you're a New York Times reader, an NPR fan, a Daily Wire subscriber, or an avid consumer of all things Tucker Carlson, for several months now there's been no avoiding the subject of Nick Fuentes. And let's be clear, the main reason you're hearing about him is because he's popular. A large number of people, especially young men, are interested in what he has to say. What that says about our society and our culture is the subject of ferocious debate. For many people, it's a grave indictment of an insidious immorality. For others, he's a product of a culture which has turned on its own and left many young people feeling listless and bitter. He's either a litmus test for right-wing hypocrisy on free speech or a walking, talking manifestation of where the lines should be drawn. And a frankly preposterous amount of airtime has been spent on debating everything from his ideology to his sexuality and whether anyone should actually talk to him at all.
If I were writing a glossary entry on the Streisand effect, I wouldn't put a picture of her next to it. I would put a picture of Nick Fuentes.
They have opted to not do so when it comes to Nazis like Nick Fuentes.
Fuentes takes this guy apart brick by brick. It's a full takedown.
My concern is that people who are a bit more moderate are deeply alarmed by Nick Fuentes.
I was very happy to see that, Nick Fuentes really passed that test with flying colors.
That fragmentation is being caused purposefully by a splinter faction of people led by a young man named Nick Fuentes.
That's the war. Can you get the beef prices down? Not crazy things that Nick Fuentes or these other loons say on social media.
Well, it looks like all the screaming about Nick Fuentes on the internet is finally dying down a little bit.
So now we had on this guy, this Fuentes guy, and never challenged him.
You should have Nick Fuentes on your show and you could ask him questions about that.
The truth is, it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend all this time talking about Nick Fuentes, but not actually to Nick Fuentes. People who say you shouldn't give him a platform overlook the very obvious fact that he already has a platform of his own, which is often bigger than most of the people complaining, and he uses it to speak unchallenged to his many followers. It's on that basis that I've invited him to appear live and uncensored on my platform, and Nick Fuentes joins me now. Nick Fuentes, welcome to Uncensored.
Hi, great to be with you.
I don't know you. I don't think we've ever met. You can correct me if that's wrong. I know about you. I know that increasingly people are talking about you in a more mainstream environment than you may be used to. So for those of you who know nothing about Nick Fuentes, I want this to be an opportunity to get to the real person. I don't know who that person is, but I do want to use this opportunity to get there. I've seen you talk, as we prepared for this, in exchanges with people and on your show, saying you fear it's going to be very hostile, it's going to be an ambush, all those kind of things. I don't intend it to be overtly hostile. I don't intend to ambush you. I intend it to be an examination of what you said on the record, an examination of what you believe or what you say you believe, and an examination of what your rising popularity says about the state of the conservative movement in America. So those are my goals from this interview. What are your goals? Why are you doing it?
I thought it'd be interesting. And, you've talked a lot about me on your show over the years, and this is the first time you actually extended the invitation. I think it might be the second, actually. I think we talked about doing it during A24 a few years ago, but you've talked a lot about me with the panel, and now you've extended the invitation to talk to me. And I think it'd be interesting for me to maybe clarify some positions and maybe get to know you a little better as well. So I'm looking forward to it.
There is a belief that you have two personas. There's one that you roll out now for podcasts and for shows like mine, where you come across as reasonable. And then there's your show on Rumble, where you often come across as having, a very unreasonable view on things. This is what Coleman Hughes said about you.
Nick Fuentes knows exactly what he's doing. He is consciously playing this double game as part of a long-term strategy to become popular enough to take the reins of power, at which point he plans to pivot towards the extreme and unpopular policies that he advocates daily on Rumble.
So first of all, what is your response to that?
Well, first of all, I would say that Coleman Hughes is a propagandist. He works for the Free Press, which is run by Barry Weiss. So I think that's you have to consider the source. And Barry Weiss is a pro-Israel partisan. Free Press is just bought out by CBS for $150 million by Larry Ellison or his son David Ellison. And so I think that's coming from a particular point of view. We can't pretend like that's coming from a vacuum or from some fixed position. That's coming from a propaganda outlet that's in favor of Israel. That's first. But second, I would say he is right about the two personas. And I think that everybody understands this on some level. On my show, I make jokes and I use rhetoric and I'm hyperbolic because for a long time I had an audience that was small on these like dissident platforms. I was on D Live for many years. A lot of people don't even know what that is. And so I had a small following and we had sort of like an in-group sense of humor and memes and things like that. And you talk about it one way on a freewheeling live stream when I'm by myself and I'm ranting and we make jokes and we play devil's advocate, we play with different positions. But then when you sit down in an interview like this one and people ask me a good faith question, what do you actually believe? Well, then I clarify and I say, well, here I'm not joking, here I'm not being hyperbolic, I'm not being rhetorical. I'll tell you precisely what I believe. As far as this idea that I'm going to get power and then turn into Hitler, that just sounds totally insane to me. I'll be honest, it just sounds insane.
Do you have aspirations for political power?
Not really. I think that if I wanted to run for office, I wouldn't say a lot of the things that I say. I don't know that a lot of people would vote for me. I tend to offend everybody, even a lot of people that like me. So no, I'm a truth teller. I like to tell the truth. I like to do my live stream.
Who is Nick Fuentes? Tell me about your upbringing. I know you grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. Tell me about your early years.
Early how? Like my childhood or a little bit later?
Yeah, your childhood, yeah.
Well, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago in LaGrange Park, as you say. My parents are ethnics. My father's half Mexican, half Irish. My mother's Italian. And they both came from a pretty rough upbringing themselves. They both were raised by single mothers, not because of divorce, but because both of their fathers had died. They endured a lot of dysfunction. And I think that's one of the reasons they came together and they related to each other and they wanted to create a normal upbringing for their children. They wanted to have a normal family life. And so they moved out to LaGrange Park away from the city. And they raised me and my sister and really put us first. I think that's a big reason why I tend to have a lot of these family values or Christian values. My mother quit her job and stayed at home to raise us. And so I have a very close relationship with my parents, with my sister. We're a very tight family. And we grew up in a pretty idyllic town. And maybe we can sort of get into a conversation about politics from this. I loved my upbringing. My mom stayed at home. My dad was working. We're in a mostly white suburb in Chicago. Everybody was maybe half Catholic, half Protestant. It was a baseball town. I played baseball for many years. In Chicago, we love our hot dogs. We have our baseball parade and get a hot dog. And so I love where I came from. I love the city. It's a working class city. I love the people here. They're very good, humble, down-to-earth, decent people. And I guess I had my political, not to jump ahead, but this is a big part of where my political awakening came from. I sort of left this bubble, if you could call it that. When I went to college in 2016, I went to Boston University. And I read a lot of things online, and I realized the country does not look like LaGrange Park. It doesn't look like Western Springs or Hinsdale or Elmhurst. It looks very different. The country's undergoing a radical transformation because of immigration. And so I saw that, and I said, this is not really a desirable change. I don't like the south side of Chicago or the west side or LA or certain parts of Boston as much as I like where I came from. And I guess that's what made me an American nationalist. I said, I want to preserve my home and the things that are familiar to me and the things I like about my home, what makes it America. So that's a little bit about my background. I don't know where you want to go with that, but that's kind of where I came from.
My first obvious question is, were your parents immigrants to the United States, or were their parents, or were their grandparents? In other words, at some stage, I presume, there were immigrants in your family who came to the U.S. Is that correct?
There were. I believe my mother was fourth generation and my father was third generation. So their ancestors came here on my mom's side in the 1860s, I believe, the first wave of Italian immigration. My father's ancestors, I think they came around at the turn of the century in 1900.
So your view of immigration, and we'll get to the specifics about your views on immigration, are they not affected at all by the fact that if it wasn't for immigration, you wouldn't exist as an American?
Well, I would certainly exist, but like you said, maybe not as an American. Certainly that's influenced in some measure. But I think that the kind of immigration that we had for a long time in the country, it's different than the immigration that we have now. And let's just say for openers, it's different immigrants. They're coming from a different place with a different culture, a different religion. It's not the same as it was. So first, you have a qualitative difference. My ancestors, for the most part, I have 3 European grandparents from Ireland and Italy, 1 from Mexico. They came from Europe. They came from a society where there's a common ancestry, there's a common religion, common civilization. The people that have come in since 65, since Hart-Celler, they're coming from China, India, the Northern Triangle, Mexico, Venezuela. And so first, they're just different people. Secondly, it's a quantitative difference. There's way more, and it's an unceasing, always increasing wave. For the first 3 or 4 waves of immigration, you would have a major influx of immigrants and then it would stop. And then you'd have another wave and then it would stop. This one, it just keeps going up for 35 years. And it's too many. So that's really where I would draw the distinction between maybe where I originate from. I would even just simply call that immigration. What this is an invasion. It's a completely different policy.
But you mentioned,
can't even call it the same thing.
But you mentioned Mexico in that list. And your father is half Mexican. So,
yeah,
I mean, by your criteria, part of the invasion would include your father, presumably, and his immediate descendants who came from Mexico.
Not really true, because when my father's ancestors came here, it was a small fraction of the total immigrants that came from Mexico. I don't believe that we should have 0 immigrants forever, or even 0 immigrants from non-white countries. But you have to draw the distinction. My father's father, he was here in the 40s and 50s. It was his parents, or I believe either his parents or grandparents, that came here even earlier. Up until 1965, 90% of the immigrants were coming from Europe. I have no problem with that. If we have 10% of them coming from Mexico or Latin America, maybe that's reasonable, but that's not what it is now. Now you've got 10 million illegals in 4 years under Joe Biden, and you got millions more legal immigrants from China, India, Venezuela, El Salvador. And it's so many with no break for assimilation, and they're all from non-white countries. It's transforming what America is. And again, that's the distinction. That's what makes it unacceptable.
I always believe everybody's a product of their environment. Right? I've interviewed thousands of people. Maybe 3, 4, 5,000 people from all different walks of life. But the one common theme I would say is everyone's a product of their environment. And I was reading some stuff about you in the last few days. There was an episode of your podcast where you talked about your father, Bill Fuentes, and how he wouldn't take the family, including you, to certain restaurants because he believed they were associated with African Americans. We would be deciding where to go to eat, you said. What are we going to do for dinner tonight? It was a running joke. Me and my sister would say Applebee's, and my dad would say we would never eat at Applebee's. Not in a million years should you be caught dead, Fuentes said about Applebee's. Go to a different restaurant, a local restaurant. No Applebee's, no Red Lobster. That is commonly known as black fare. And you also shared another story about your family and restaurants. It said, before me and my sister were born, my family had a saying about Olive Garden that contains the N-word that we're not allowed to say. So my question, based on that anecdote that you say on your own podcast, is, do you think you grew up in a racist environment, that your father was inherently racist, and that thought process moved to you?
Well, I would say it's a new low. I've been attacked for being a racist many times, but to attack my father, to attack my parents based on anecdotes, I would say that's sort of a new low.
Hang on, it's your anecdote.
Yeah, but he's not here to defend himself.
You are.
And my parents aren't.
You told the story.
And I will, and I'll
I'm
defend
not trying
them.
to ambush you. As I said at the start, Nick, to be clear.
No, it's not an ambush,
Nick,
but
to be clear,
I think everybody
I'm not
understands.
ambushing you. I'm literally reading an anecdote that you revealed on your podcast. It's you that's put it in the public domain.
I know.
I'm simply asking you whether my assessment of that, which is that your father didn't want to take you to certain restaurants because of what you refer to as, they were commonly known as black fare, whether that attitude to African Americans in that instance permeated to you. It's a reasonable question.
Yeah, no, like I said, I think everybody knows what that is, but I'll address it. I'll engage with it, and I'll defend my father from the charge of racism.
Sure.
No, my parents are not racist, and they've never been racist. I'll tell you about my parents. They used to have a school in Chicago in the South Loop where they instructed people on how to shoot firearms. It was a security school, and most of the clients were black. And I believe actually one of their clients was Larry Hoover's son at one point, sort of a funny story. And so most of their clients would come in from the south side of Chicago. My grandmother, she grew up in the projects in the city. And so my family, being in Chicago, being ethnics, being Italian, Irish, Mexican, in the west side on Taylor Street, all over the city, my family for many generations have lived near and around black people. And look, my views about black people and their views about black people are shaped with experiences with black people. And what they will tell you, what my parents would say if they were here, is that for many, many years, the older generations of black people were very respectful, very humble, very decent. In fact, my grandma used to have an anecdote. She grew up in a lot of dysfunction. Her mother was mentally ill, and they would be having dinner in the projects, and there'd be so much chaos and dysfunction and disagreement and fighting. And she would look across the way out the window at a black family in the other apartment, and they'd be holding hands around the table saying grace. And this is sort of the culture that used to prevail. But now what you have in the city is that there's no accountability for the black people. And now Chicago has become a complete dump because these teenagers go out and they take over the city. They call them teen takeovers. That's the euphemism for it. They're teenagers, but they all come from the same neighborhood. They drive up there and they mug people and attack people and they destroy cars and destroy shops. We had the Festival of Lights a couple of weeks ago. It's supposed to be a family event. And they light up the trees and they, there's a big parade. I was in the parade one year and you had a bunch of black people there shooting each other. 7 people shot, a 14-year-old killed in the Magnificent Mile. And I know there's a lot of black people that feel the same way about this. They say, we've lost control of the city and we're looking for accountability. We have a lot of black people that are always outraged about racism, outraged about attitudes from white people, but they're never ashamed of some of these behaviors, never ashamed of some of the things that go on. And that's why I think there's a lot of negative attitudes these days. And so, again, I think those attitudes, you say I'm a product of my environment. I am, and so are my parents and my grandparents. Unlike you, because you're not even American, in Chicago, we have to live in a big, diverse city where there's a lot of different kinds of people. And I think anybody in Chicago will tell you the same.
I live in London. It's one of the biggest and most diverse cities in the world.
But it's not the same.
Well, actually, it's a big, diverse city. The only difference is we don't have the gun violence because we don't have guns. That's a whole different story. I don't want to get into that with you. I have got into that before in America.
You got a knife problem. You got sword problems.
We have problems.
You have Aladdin.
We have problems with violent crime. I make no pretense of it. So the idea that somehow I'm cosseted in London because I'm not in Chicago.
I didn't say that.
Well, you kind of implied it, but I guess my point about the environment, I'm not saying you are a product of your environment. I'm saying most people are in some capacity. When I read that anecdote, which just to remind you, it's not something I have put out there. You told this story, right? And you said that
you said this. We're looping. You said this already.
But you haven't really directly, I think, responded to it, which is whether your father would not take you to certain restaurant chains because he associated them with black Americans. Is that true?
No, well, see here, if you're in America, you would say that Olive Garden is not real Italian food. Applebee's, TGI Fridays, this stuff is a load of crap. My dad was just a food snob, but no, it's got nothing to do with that. My best friend in first grade was a black guy. We're not a racist family, so.
Okay, so when you told the story, I'm just curious. So when you told that anecdote, which clearly on the face of it is racist, right? You're basically saying your father made racist decisions about where you would go as a family to eat. Are you saying, well, I'm just going to ask you a question. Are you saying that when you told that story, you didn't mean to infer that he was racist? And do you understand why when somebody like me reads that anecdote for the first time, as I did this week, I reach a different conclusion?
Well, I understand what you're doing, which is this sort of making of a murderer. How did he become racist? Well, his father didn't eat an Olive Garden because he said that's not real Italian food. Hang on, can I? What's with the interruptions? Can I explain?
I'm literally reminding you of something you said on your show, which led me to conclude a certain thing. If I'm wrong, tell me.
Yeah, it was said in jest as a humorous anecdote, and now you're trying to spin it into a narrative, which is his parents are racist. He comes from a long line of racists. And I think everybody knows my parents are boomers. And these people well, you're a boomer, I guess, too, in a way,
60.
right? You were born in what, 19? Yeah, so you're a boomer also. Or maybe you're a Gen Xer. I suppose it's sort of on the cusp. But it's a humorous anecdote. These are kind of the attitudes of baby boomers in society, but you're trying to spin it into a narrative, which is you're a product of your environment. Your dad's racist because of this joke. Now you're a racist, and I don't think that's a fair characterization.
Okay. People can make their own minds up. They can go back and listen to you say it. I mean, the beauty of what I'm going to talk to you about in this interview is that almost all of it is just going to be reminding you what you have said and asking you what you meant. Your position about that story is that it was a joke, okay? I want to come to something else you said. This is where you talk about Jews, women, and blacks. Let's just take a listen.
They're always coming up with, no, it's not the Jews. No, it's not women. No, it's not blacks. It's actually really complicated. No, it fucking isn't at all. Jews are running society. Women need to shut the fuck up. Blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part. And we would live in paradise. It's that simple.
Okay. Would you like to clarify what you meant there?
That's all true. That's 100% true. Everything I said in that clip is true.
Including that blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part.
Yeah. Yes.
But all of them?
No, for the most part.
What does the most part mean? What percentage of American blacks would you like to see in prison?
Whatever the percentages of the murderers. I think it's 1 in 20 black men will commit a murder in their lifetime, so maybe let's say that, 5%.
Oh, so you're talking about black people who murder people?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But you didn't say that. You just said blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part. You didn't clarify that you were talking about black murderers.
Right. No, you're right. That's a good addition to that. That's a great point.
Do you think it's funny, or?
Yeah, I do. I think it's hilarious. I think it's totally true.
Do you think a black American would find it funny? You think that blacks should be imprisoned for the most part?
Blacks are my biggest fans. I get high fives all the time. They say, Nick Fuentes, I love your show. They agree with me. And you want to know why? Here's the difference. Black people are the most victimized by other black people. You think black people want to live in the hood and the ghetto and get shot all the time? That's what happens in the south side of Chicago. You should come here. I'll take you there. We could go to Garfield Park.
My son went to Chicago University for a year, actually, several years ago.
Yeah, that's a bubble. That's a bubble. You think you're in Chicago and Hyde Park? You don't know Chicago. Go a little bit west. See what it's like over there. And I'll tell you, black people agree with me because they're tired of it too. And maybe not most of them, but a lot of them agree with what I say about that because they know how it is. That's why the first thing they do when they make a little bit of money is they go and leave to another neighborhood.
Okay, so what was just remind me again, the percentage of black men who commit murder in America. What was the percentage you gave me?
It's 1 in 20. 1 in 20.
It's 1 in 100.
No, it's 1 in 20.
No. Less than 1 in 100 black U.S. men commit murder. That's the most up-to-date crime statistics in America.
That's not true. I've seen other statistics. They say 1 in 20 will eventually commit a murder.
So your rate means that you're saying that 5 times as many black men commit murder as the official crime statistics say.
Yeah, there's a report, I believe, on X by Data Hazard. I'll have to go and double-check that for you. But yes, there's some pretty shocking evidence that says that it's far more alarming than you would think.
Okay, but you would accept that the official crime statistics are 1 in 100? Or you wouldn't accept that statistic?
I don't know. I don't have it in front of me, but I've seen other evidence. Like I said, Data Hazard on X, I believe, produced a report about a year ago. It said 1 in 20. But, I mean, whether it's 1 in 20 or 1 in 100, that's a lot of people, Piers. I mean,
sure,
this is
a lot of white people commit murder too. Well, they do, don't they?
Okay, but it's about proportionality. I mean, white people are 65% of the population. Blacks are 13%. And I think anybody would tell you that more black people proportionally commit violent crime than white people, and people vote with their feet. People would rather pay a much higher property tax.
Most mass shootings.
What's with the interruptions?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, you look at in Chicago, in New York, these neighborhoods are so stratified. People would rather pay a high tax rate. They'd rather pay a much higher property value to live in a less diverse, less black neighborhood because they don't want to live around the violence. And I think that when you look at even on the public transit, the subway, the blue line, you know, people don't want to go there because they know who occupies and menaces the public transit. It is these people like Daniel Penny had to deal with. It's people like Irina Zarutska had to deal with. And that's just the uncomfortable reality.
You've also said you don't want to live near black people. Let's take a listen to this clip.
I'm a new generation of white person. I'm not living around blacks. Sorry. You know, I want white kids, and I don't want my white kids bringing home black people to marry. It's racial for me. And call me racist. Oh, very Christian of you. I don't give a fuck.
I mean, it couldn't be clearer, really, unless you want to say that's another of your jokes. But you're basically saying, yeah, I'm a racist, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
You're fine with saying you're a racist?
Totally. I think everybody's racist. I think everybody, if we're being honest, is racist. I think everybody, the only people that aren't racist or pretend not to be are white people to their detriment. Everybody else is racist.
But earlier in the interview, you really got aggrieved at the idea that your father was a racist. You wanted to make emphatically
because
sure
my father's...
He's not.
Because my father doesn't share my same views on that.
So he's the exception to the everyone's a racist.
Well, everybody's a little bit racist. You're right. So maybe everybody... The difference is you're attacking my father. You know, he could get fired from his job.
I'm not attacking your father.
You are.
No, I'm not. I don't know your father. And to be clear, I have no knowledge about him at all
Well, then let's leave him out of it. Let's leave him out of it if you don't know him.
Hang on, Nick. You put that story into the public domain on your show. I'm simply reminding you of what you told everybody, millions of people, about your father. If you now want to retract it, fine. If you want to say it was a joke, which is what your position was earlier, fine. But I'm allowed to put to you things you've said publicly. That's not unfair. That's not me targeting your father. You put that story about him out there.
You know what you're doing. You know what you're doing.
I'm asking you about a pretty shocking anecdote, which to me looked like you were saying your father made decisions about where you as a family would eat based on skin color of people who worked at these places. If you say, or use them, if you say that is not what you meant, that's fine. You can respond any way you like. But the idea I can't ask you about it without you saying I'm attacking your father is ridiculous.
Well, you are, and you know what you're doing, and there's a political culture in America where if you have the wrong views, you get fired from your job. And my father has a job, and if you go on here and say you charge him with racism or something, and I'm put in a position where I don't look like I'm sticking to my guns if I don't say my father's a racist, you're putting him in jeopardy, and he's not here to defend himself or explain his views. And it's very low, and I think you know exactly what you're doing, and people can see what you're doing. I'll defend my views. And I think that, you know, so let's leave him out of it. Let's just not talk about my father because my father isn't here. I'm here.
Okay, well,
I'll
then do you accept that you shouldn't talk?
I'll defend the anecdote.
Listen, that's fine. But then do you accept you shouldn't talk about your father on your show? And you shouldn't tell...
Absolutely not. Absolutely
not. So
not.
it's fine for you to put a story out there which would make most people who listened to that story or watched it at the time on your show conclude that he was racist. It's fine for you to do that. But if I then ask you about it, I'm the one who's being unfair and I've crossed a line. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you're being malicious.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Listen, people are watching this live. They can draw their own conclusions about whether what I just did...
And they will.
Yeah, and I'm sure afterwards, by the way, you'll say, he ambushed me with your own... With your own words.
Whoa.
With your own words.
That's a little presumptuous. I'm not going to say it's an ambush, but I think that's a low blow. And I think you know what you're doing, and that's fine. You're a tabloid journalist. I expected that. I don't think it's an ambush because I knew it would be like this. And people will see what you're doing, and I think they'll say it's low. But as far as you want to talk about racism... let's talk about racism.
Okay,
Let's leave my dad out of it.
Look, you've admitted you're a racist, correct?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
Own it.
Okay, that's fine. You're perfectly entitled in a free democratic society to stare down the barrel of his camera and tell me you're a racist. People can judge you accordingly. Many people who have assumed that you're racist will now have heard it from your own lips. That's fine.
There you go.
That's the point. The point of this interview is to go over the things you've said, which have led people to reach conclusions about you, and to ascertain whether those conclusions are fair and reasonable or not. That's it.
Thank
I want
you.
to play you another clip. This is what you talk about why white people are justified in being racist. Let's take a listen to this.
First, white people are every single bit justified in being racist. Every single bit justified, to the extent that that means going out of your way to avoid black people when you see them.
You stand by that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So white people should go out of their way to avoid black people when they see them.
Absolutely. They would be wise.
Why?
Because it's a lose-lose proposition. If you're Irina Zarutska and you don't walk the other way, you get stabbed to death and you die. If you're somebody else and you walk on the subway and you stand near a black person or something, maybe it's fine. It's a lose-lose proposition. So no, I think that white people have been beaten into submission, that we're afraid to tell the truth about it. And the truth is that when you go into these major cities like New York or Chicago, I believe she was in North Carolina, there is a menace, which is young, black, adolescent men. They're extremely violent. And we have been told that we have to pretend like they are every other person. We have to be colorblind to that. And we're supposed to go and be in the midst of all this danger. And I think that at this point, it's gotten out of control. You look at the BLM movement, they said that the reason that black people, are violent, or the reason there's crime, is because of police brutality, or redlining, or all these other things. They said we need to get rid of the police. We need to defund them. And a lot of cities did. A lot of cities like Chicago, for example, the police changed the rules of engagement. They don't chase them. It's not a felony if you steal a certain amount of merchandise. They won't chase them on foot. And now the city's totally up for grabs. And now, whether you're in the Gold Coast or whether you're on the Mag Mile or you're in the worst neighborhoods in the city, you might get shot, you might get mugged, someone might run up on you. And I tell my followers, it is better to be perceived as racist or racist and walk the other way and maybe keep your life than to say, I'm a good anti-racist. I don't mind that this person's making me uncomfortable. Maybe he's looking a little froggy. I'm going to sit down because I'm a good person and get stabbed, mugged, whatever. And by the way, this is a strategy. They call it the friendly stranger. There's a crew of them. They do this in Chicago. They stand outside bars, black people. They approach strangers. It's a robbery crew. And they pretend to be a friendly stranger, and then they mug them. And stupid white people say, oh, hi, yeah, nice to meet you. You know, they grin, they laugh, they put up with the nonsense, and then they get mugged, or worse. Sometimes they get executed. And so as a white person,
how do you feel about mass shootings at school?
I think they're bad.
Who do you think commits the vast majority of the mass shootings?
I'm sure
at
it's
schools?
white people.
Right. So how do you feel about that?
I think that white people do more antisocial violence. I think black people participate in more gang violence. I think that's the difference.
What's the difference to the victims?
There's no difference to the victim, but it's a different kind of crime, and it's a different proportion also. Do you know what percentage of white people are school shooters?
I know that the vast majority of mass shootings in schools in America this century were perpetrated by young white men. And I'm
what proportion?
I'm curious whether your advice would be to people who have kids in these schools.
Wait, is my mic working?
Should they avoid white people at school? Should people with the kids at school avoid young white men at school?
No.
Okay.
Do you know what per capita means? Do you know proportionality? There are more black people proportionally that engage in violent crime or are involved in gangs, especially in these major cities, than there are white people that are school shooters compared to the entire white population, and everybody understands that.
Two-thirds of mass shootings at school perpetrated by white people.
But what proportion of white men commit school shootings? That's the question.
I've just told you. It's 60 or 65% of school shootings by white people.
You're telling me what proportion of school shootings are committed by white people. I'm saying what proportion of white people have committed school shootings. Are you playing dumb, or are you just not that smart?
What difference does that make to the children lying dead on the ground?
See, now you want to jump on the victims. The difference is you're asking, would you fear white people or black people? And that's the difference. The difference is in terms
What I'm saying to you is, by your logic, if we now have agreed that the vast majority of mass shootings in schools are committed by white people and predominantly young white men, then presumably your advice would be to avoid young white men because they perpetrate these massacres. But it won't be because they're white, right?
So are you playing dumb, or are you actually dumb?
Maybe
it's
I'm
about
dumb.
proportionality.
Maybe I'm dumb.
You are because well, I don't think you are dumb. I think you're smart actually, but you're deliberately avoiding per capita. And everybody knows that's the difference. What proportion of white men are school shooters? It's probably 0.00001%. What proportion of black men have committed violent crimes? It's probably like 5%. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but it's very high. And I would add to that, even as it concerns schools, why do you think parents pay a super high property tax to live in a school district where there's white people? Because they know that if they go to the black school, it's going to be the Bloods and the Crips. It's going to be gangs. It's going to be, you talk about school shootings. Nobody talks about all the school shootings that are committed by gangbangers in and around the school and all the other violence that's associated with that. I mean, these schools in the south side of Chicago, it's just not
I have an answer
workable
for you, Nick. So the proportion of the population who carry out mass shootings is actually the same for black and white.
For white people, the proportion of
the proportion
again,
of the
are you hearing it? No.
See, I think the trouble with your statistics is a lot of them don't bear much scrutiny. We have a bunch of fact checkers checking all this in real time because you do have a tendency to just come out with a lot of old baloney. And when you say, well, it's true. And when you're confronted with reality, you don't like it.
What's the figure? What proportion of white people have committed school shootings? With white people as the denominator and white people that have committed school shootings as the numerator, what's that percentage?
For both black and whites, the proportion of the population who carry out mass shootings generally is about the same.
No. Tell me the number, and then
the only focus of your attention is the black shootings, the black crime. You don't want to live around black people. You want to avoid black people. You don't want interracial marriages or relationships that may produce black people. And yet, when I point out to you that there are many parts of crime in America where actually there's a majority of white people that perpetrate them, you don't care. You don't have any interest in that. It doesn't exercise your mind. Maybe because
no one's buying this. This argument lost. No one is buying this. Everybody understands per capita, and people can even see what you race ahead and say, well, we're comparing the proportion of white and black school shooters. I said, no, compare the proportion of school shooters that are white versus violent criminals that are black, because that was the basis of the monologue, is that you're very likely, if you encounter black people or a young black man in the city, that you're going to be the victim of a violent crime, of a robbery, a mugging, a car theft, a carjacking, or a murder. That's the difference, and it's about proportionality. And everybody sees past that because we all live in reality. You want to talk about product of your environment? People that live in New York, Chicago, LA, we live in reality. We live in this environment, and we see what it's like. And the threat, the danger, in terms of probability, is it's not even comparable. And I would say this, to your point. If you're in a high school and truly, if you see a white person who looks like a little autistic, he's got the SSRI stare, and he reaches for a backpack, people joke and say, run. Similarly, if you see a jalopy pulling up with a bunch of black people in it and they got their pants around the ankles, you're going to run also. And I'm saying the same thing. The difference is, the latter happens much more often. It's much more common. In Chicago, there's like 10,000 carjackings and car thefts every day. It's in the thousands. It happens all the time. How many mass shootings committed by autistic SSRI white people? I don't even know. I mean, it's probably in the single digits in the last decade in this city. That's the difference, and everybody knows that. But you're really just trying to carry water for liberal ideology. It's an ideological position.
I'm really not. I can absolutely say, yes, there is way too much black on black crime, for example, involving guns in Chicago.
And black on white, also.
Yes, but there is way too much gun violence in Chicago, right? I mean, it's indisputable. I've got no problem saying that. The difference is I don't then lead myself into a thought process where I have to avoid all black people in case they shoot me. And you've already conceded that you are a racist. So when people hear you then say, I don't want to be living anywhere near black people, they already have heard you say, I'm a racist, so they assume you're doing that because of people's skin color. I don't think you would probably dispute that, right?
Well, you're separating two different things. The monologue when I said I don't want to live around black people, that was after Irina Zarutska got shot, and it's true. I mean, they are a largely in this city, in Chicago, the south side, the west side, huge criminal population, and I don't want to live anywhere near it. And I do. I want to live in a white neighborhood. I think that that's extremely desirable, and I think even
Nick,
black people
Nick, you're perfectly entitled to that view. But when you have obviously prefaced all this by saying, I am a racist, unashamedly, then people will assume that all your thought processes about all of these issues are driven by an aversion to people based on their skin color, which is the purest personification of racism.
Well, it's not an aversion. I would say it's the opposite. I like my own people. My own people are familiar to me, and I think that's true across the board. I think that people seek out other people that are like themselves, and every other group does this, whether it's blacks, Hispanics, Asians. You know, I get a lot of attacks when I talk about that I'm against interracial marriage. And what's funny is that every other group is against interracial or interethnic marriage. Jews,
but you're the
Chinese,
you're the product of an interracial marriage.
Yeah, I mean, that's debatable.
Not
Let's
really.
say for the sake of argument, sure.
No, you're the product of an interracial marriage, and your father is part Mexican. You're literally,
for the sake of
argument,
the
very
say,
person
sure.
you've just told me you want to avoid.
What race is Hispanic? Is that a race?
Well, what do you think it is?
I'm asking you, what race is Hispanic?
Hispanic, of course it's a race. It's called Hispanic.
It's a mix between two races. It's a mix between indigenous Americans
and Europeans. It's not white, though, is it? It's not white.
Well, apparently you're more of a racial purist than me. You got like
not
a
really. You just keep saying you only want to live in a white neighborhood, but you're literally from a mixed race background yourself. You've literally got Mexican blood.
I know, and I live in a non-white neighborhood too. I'm trying to get out of here, though. But I'm trying to get out. But here's the thing.
Do you have any non-white friends? Genuine question.
Most of my friends are non-white. Most of my friends are not, and non-white people love my show.
How many are black?
The honesty.
How many of your friends are black?
Many of them, like at least a dozen.
Wow.
Ye being one who you know, Sneeko being another who you also know.
Yeah. So how do they feel when you say you just want to be away from any black people, walk away from them?
Well, you know what Ye told me? I'll tell you verbatim what he said. He said, so you use the N-word. I said, yeah. He goes, well, when niggas are being niggas. I said, so true. That's so true. They feel like they're in complete agreement with me.
What does that mean?
It means that even black people know how black people can behave. Even black people understand it. And they know that it doesn't come from a place of, and you use the word aversion. That's the first thing I'll actually dispute.
Okay.
It's not an aversion on the basis of skin color, because that would seem to suggest it's like a stubborn, irrational bigotry. I don't consider myself a bigot. I consider myself a racial realist. I'm realistic about how the races are, and I speak provocatively about it. And I speak provocatively about our tribalistic instincts and tendencies as human beings. And I'm not a liberal ideologue that says that over time and with enough education, we're all going to see this great brotherhood where we're colorblind and everybody's the same. You know, I don't think that's ever going away. I think that race is real. It's not just skin deep. It matters to us and it matters to each other. And black people know that, and Hispanics know that, and Asians know that. And people like me that have partial Mexican ancestry, we know that too. And I think on that basis, we can have mutual respect and understanding, not aversion based on skin color.
The reason I use the word aversion is you literally said that you should walk the other way if you see black people. That is an aversion to black people based on their skin color.
No, that's called economy of information. That's economy of information. That's safety. And I said in the same monologue, if you watch it, it's like, I feel sorry. The problem is you clip the 10 seconds. I don't know if you watched the whole show, but in that monologue, I said, most black people are not violent or criminals. I said, and it's unfortunate that we're going to offend them when we turn and walk the other way. I said, but the problem is we don't know. We can't tell. And someone like Irina Zarutska, she sat down in front of a black man with her headphones in and wasn't paying attention because she was being a good liberal and said, I'm not uncomfortable by this. I'm progressive. Then she got stabbed in the neck. And I said, it's unfortunate that you would have to sit behind the black man to be safe. And if he's not violent or schizophrenic, he might be offended by that. I said, but I would rather offend him.
How many deranged white men have committed atrocious acts of murder in the last 10 years in America?
Proportionally, far fewer.
No, but how many?
Fewer.
How many? Do you know how many?
You have a research team. You pull it up. I don't have it in front of me.
You're obviously extremely exercised by that one story, which was horrific for the record. Absolutely horrific. And should never have happened. The person who perpetrated that evil act had a string of previous offences and should have been picked up more, and it should have been amplified more. I completely concur with all of that. But I just suspect you have no idea how many white people have committed similar crimes, do you?
No, because I know it's far fewer from experience.
Okay.
Because it's like you said. Well, and hang on, and I would add to that, Irina Zarutska wasn't the first one. That was also after Austin Metcalf was killed in Texas.
Sure.
After Carmelo Anthony stabbed him in the neck.
How many times has it been perpetrated by white people?
Well, hang on. Let me finish my point.
But you're implying that white people don't do this. And my point to you, Nick Fuentes, is of course.
Oh, I never said white people don't do it.
Of course, deranged white people commit heinous acts. But you don't either know.
No disagreement.
You neither know nor care, or maybe both. Maybe you do know but don't care. You only seem to be focused on black people who commit crimes. And again, if you hadn't prefaced the whole debate about racism by openly conceding you are a racist, I could read other connotations into what you've been saying. But once you've said, I'm a racist, and then you only talk about black crime, I think people can watch this and they can say, yeah, he's a racist. And everything that he says about crime is driven through the prism of being a racist who judges people according to their skin color.
Well, it's funny because it's quite on the contrary. And I said this in a similar monologue. The problem is not that I wake up and I walk down the street and I see someone that doesn't look like me and it makes me angry. The problem is there's a pattern of behavior, which we've all seen. Blacks in America have become narcissistic, and they become narcissistic because they've been told they're victims of racism, they're victims of slavery. They've been told, really, there's no accountability. If they're rude, if they're inconsiderate, if they're criminal, they are told that they have no agency for their actions. They're being told, if you act in this way, it's because the white man made you that way. It's because the system's rigged against you. And so we have been telling black people this for a generation, and now there's no rules. Now they go, and what we hate to see as decent people, not even as white people, but decent people, even black people too, what we hate to see is rudeness, obnoxiousness, inconsideration, criminality, violence, and that's that pattern of behavior that we see all over social media, on the body cam footage,
you don't like black people who play the victim and are rude. Is that your position?
I don't like that pattern of behavior.
And who are narcissists?
I see where this is going.
Yeah, you're ahead of me.
Turn this around on me.
You're ahead of me, aren't you? Because when I said,
very clever.
What black friends have you got? You said,
I am kind of black, aren't I?
No, not that. You said,
I'm
not saying you. I'm just saying your choice of black friend is Ye, who is arguably the number one black victimhood narcissist in America. Do you understand the problem? So he's your friend. He's one of the very few black people you want to be associated with, but he's the epitome of what you just said you abhor about narcissistic black people.
I disagree. I disagree with you, and I'll tell you why. Because Ye, if you've ever met him in real life...
I have, yeah.
Okay, well, then you know. He's nothing but polite, considerate.
Actually, he was very rude to me the last 2 times I interviewed him. He's a supreme narcissist, and he's also...
Well, you keep interrupting me. You're very rude. Are you black? Because you're being very rude by interrupting me right now.
To you.
I'm giving you a hard time, but I do want to finish my point. I do want to finish my point about Ye. He is a guy who, when I was with him, wanted to make sure that everybody was heard. Everybody felt included. He's actually a very soft-spoken guy, very polite, and by the way, not violent. When you look at all the rappers that are in the music game, many of them, especially from Chicago, drill rap, they're talking about killing people, shooting people, they gangbang. He notably, if you know about him, he got his start because he was a nerd. He wore a backpack and a polo, and he wasn't a gangbanger. He rapped about his feelings and girls and his dreams and his ambitions. So, no, and by the way, he would tell me all the time, he doesn't even feel black. They make him feel not black because he doesn't do those things, because he's soft-spoken, because he's artistic, because he's a bit of a nerd or likes fashion. So I would disagree. He's actually not like that at all.
Okay. He's also a Hitler-loving anti-Semite. And we're going to take a little commercial break here, and we're going to come back and talk about anti-Semitism and your views about Jewish people, and indeed what Yair said about the same subject matter. Accountability. Okay, back with Nick Fuentes. Let's just turn to anti-Semitism. In your interview with Stephen Crowder last week, you answered emphatically that you don't hate all Jews. Is that correct? That's your position?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to play you this clip.
Well, I don't hate any Jews. Let me just amend that. I don't hate any Jews.
Okay. Let's play this clip.
The reason I've had it is because my opposition to world Jewry and Israel is rooted in absolute, uncontestable fact. We have the truth on our side. That's why we're winning. Because we are telling the truth about the historical antagonism between Jews and Europeans, between Jews and Christians. The theological, historical, racial, cultural, and political antagonisms between organized Jewry and the Christians, organized Jewry and Europeans. And the reason that we are winning that argument is because it's real, it's true. I can prove it, I can show you, I can name the names, I can show you the paper trail, the money. That is why we're winning. That is why all of this is raising the consciousness.
When you say you have this opposition to world Jewry, I mean, it's one thing to criticize, for example, the Israeli government over what it's been doing in Gaza. I've done that myself. When you talk about world Jewry, I presume you're talking about the 15 million Jews in the world, and you are opposed to them. How does that square with your position that you don't hate any Jews?
Well, do you take issue with my use of the term world Jewry?
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, do you take issue with it? Do you have a problem with that?
Clarify what you mean by it.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. The gaslighting's crazy because I use that expression on my show all the time. I say organized Jewry, world Jewry. And do you know that for like 30 years, the World Jewish Congress has an annual keynote called the State of World Jewry? Barry Weiss has given it. You can look it up. It's on YouTube. She gives the State of World Jewry address.
But Nick, what do you mean by it?
I mean, you have to talk about, there's a concept of Jewish peoplehood. It's the sense that they are part of a common nationality, a common tribe, a common people. And so where they reside in Israel, the United States, or Europe, or elsewhere, they see each other above or maybe on a different level alongside their nationality, their state, wherever they reside. If they're in Germany, France, the United States, they see themselves as part of a transnational nation, of an international nation. The Jews in America, the Jews in Israel, they identify as Israeli or American, but they also have something in common. They identify as part of a common nation, which I would say there's a world Jewish population. It's world Jewry. And world Jewry has representatives. There is such a thing as the World Jewish Congress, where they actually elect, it's democratic, all the local Jewish organizations elect representatives to represent proportionally the Jewish population in their area at the World Jewish Congress. And it's sort of like Davos. It's like the World Economic Forum, but it's exclusively for members of the Jewish nation that exists across the world. And so that's a real thing. And I didn't make that up, and that didn't come from 4chan. It's like I said in that clip. I read what they write. I read their books. I watch these speeches. I watch a speech from Barry Weiss. I pay very close attention. So that's what I mean by that. There is such a thing as it's a nation that exists across borders on a global scale. They're organized, and they have a national self-interest as that nation, as that tribe.
So if you don't hate any Jews, what do you like about them?
I like a lot of things about them. I think they're funny. I think they're smart. I think that they're pretty remarkable people. And as Christians, especially as Catholics, we say they're remarkable. And this has been adjudicated in Catholic doctrine for thousands of years. We say that they're a witness people. And so we actually, there's provisions inside of Catholic doctrine that says we need to give them special protections because they were a witness to Christ's passion. So, this is why you can't clip the show. You have to watch the whole thing. I say this repeatedly in interviews. I do think they're remarkable. By definition, they're exceptional people. It's just that there is a sort of natural opposition between them and Christians because of the theology. We believe that Christ is the Messiah. They don't. They have been a minority in Christian lands for thousands of years, and they have been pushed around and expelled, and they've been persecuted and segregated, and that's why there's a lot of paranoia. There's a lot of distrust. There's maybe some sense of chauvinism among Jewish people. So there is, like I said in that clip, there is an historical antagonism between these two peoples, between Christendom and Jewry, and that has always been the case in Europe. But I don't hate them, and I think I actually sort of understand them in a weird way. I think that because I've studied a lot of their politics, I think I really kind of know them in a way, and it doesn't come from a place of hatred.
Do you have any Jewish friends?
I do. I have many, yes.
But that's weird because you said this.
Jews and Christians have never been friends, ever. Not since Jesus Christ fought with the Pharisees. Have we ever been friends? Not since Saul was leading the charge persecuting the Christians. Not since the Roman Empire, not since the Middle Ages. Never. We've never been friends. We've never been allies. We've always been set against each other, actually. And even here in the United States, it was communist Jews who were the architects of both communism and the civil rights laws that are dispossessing white Christians of their land and civilization.
The Jews and Christians have never been friends ever, except for you and your Jewish friends.
Yeah, so easy. As peoples, as nations.
Got it.
Not saying every individual Christian, and of course there have been Christians and there have been Christian converts to Judaism, Jewish converts to Christian. You're nodding your head, but you're asking this. I'm saying as peoples, they've never been aligned.
As a Roman, I'm a Catholic
Okay.
like you, and I have many Jewish friends. And I'm just trying to compute what you're trying to say, which is Jews and Christians have never been friends ever. And I'm like, well, you have Jewish friends, I have Jewish friends, we're both Catholics, therefore we're Christians. So it doesn't really quite add up.
Well, like I said, as peoples, there has been an historical antagonism as peoples. And you could even say the same about blacks in the United States. Of course, there were black and white people that were friendly with each other, but in many ways they were set against each other as groups. And I think that's easy enough to understand.
The reason that many people think you're anti-Semitic is that you have regularly downplayed the Holocaust, and in particular the number of Jewish people who were murdered by the Nazis. It's been said that you believe no more than several 100,000 have been killed. And I want to play you this clip.
People talk about, well, what about the gas chambers? Well, to the extent that that's real, I find that hard to believe, but to the extent that's real, there have been atrocities committed and genocides committed in all times and all places. Let's acknowledge why Hitler casts the long shadow. Because that confers a political benefit upon Jews. That's why. It doesn't really sound correct to me. Wait a second. It takes 1 hour to cook a batch of cookies, and you have 15 ovens, probably in 4 different kitchens, right? Doing 24 hours a day, every day for 5 years.